Yes, it's the Clark Gables, just in from the coast. Charming Carole Lombard and friend husband get a mighty welcome.
What if I told you that one of Hollywood's biggest stars died in a plane crash that never should have happened? A crash where the pilot went miles off course, where military passengers kicked civilians off the plane at the last second, where fuel tanks couldn't be filled all the way because of too much weight, and where all the navigation lights were turned off because of war. But here's the thing that changes everything. Someone saw something right before the plane hit the mountain, something the investigators didn't want to talk about. The evidence was always there, hiding in plain sight. And now, after all these years, we finally understand what really took down one of the brightest stars Hollywood has ever seen on that freezing cold night in January. This is the story of Carole Lombard, and trust me, it's not what you think. Let's go back to the beginning. On October 6, 1908, a baby girl was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Her name was Jane Alice Peters, but the world would come to know her as Carole Lombard. She was the youngest kid in her family and the only girl. She had 2 older brothers, and life seemed pretty perfect for little Jane. Her family had money, like a lot of money. Her grandfather had started a company that made washing machines, and by the time Jane was growing up, his company was making half of all the washing machines in the entire world. Can you imagine that? He also owned other businesses and even built a huge hotel in town. So Jane grew up in this massive house with everything she could want. It was like living in a dream. But dreams don't always last forever. When Jane was just 4 years old, something terrible happened. It rained and rained and rained. 11 inches of rain fell in just 2 storms, and the rivers around Fort Wayne couldn't handle it. The water burst through and flooded everything. 6 people died in that flood, including 4 little girls who lived in an orphanage. Over 15,000 people lost their homes. Everything was underwater. Jane's family was lucky because their house had one of the only telephones in the neighborhood, so people came to them for help. Jane's mom, Bessie, helped organize food and clothes for everyone who needed it, and little Jane helped too. She later joked that this was the first time she almost drowned, but something about that experience stuck with her forever. She saw how quickly everything could change, how fast safety could turn into disaster. Things got worse at home after that. Jane's father got hurt somehow, and it changed him. He became angry and mean. His moods were scary, and sometimes he got violent. Jane's mom had finally had enough. She was done. So in 1914, when Jane was just 6 years old, her mom packed up all 3 kids and moved them all the way across the country to Los Angeles, California. They never went back to Indiana. Jane's father stayed behind and sent them money sometimes, but the marriage was over. Jane was just 6 years old, standing in a brand new city with no idea that she was about to walk straight into the world that would make her famous. California in 1914 was wild. The movie industry was just starting to figure itself out, and it was growing like crazy. Jane didn't know it yet, but she was standing right in the middle of something huge. As Jane grew up, she became this incredible athlete. By the time she was 12, she was winning trophies for running, swimming, and volleyball. She could jump farther than most of the boys. She played harder than anyone. She was tough. And one afternoon in 1921, when she was playing baseball with some other kids, a movie director named Alan Dwan happened to see her. He watched this little tomboy absolutely destroying the other kids at baseball, and he thought, "That's exactly what I need for my movie." So he cast her in a film called A Perfect Crime. It only took 2 days to film, and it didn't make her famous or anything. The movie probably doesn't even exist anymore. But something happened inside Jane during those 2 days. Something clicked. She had tasted what it felt like to be in front of a camera, and she wanted more. By the time Jane was 15, she was voted queen of her school's May Day celebration. By 16, in October 1924, she signed an actual contract with Fox Film for $75 a week. That might not sound like a lot, but back then, that was like making $2,300 a week in today's money. Her mom had helped set up the screen test through a famous gossip writer named Luella Parsons. The studio didn't like Jane's last name, Peters, so they changed it. They called her Carole Lombard. She later added an E to Carole because she thought it would bring her good luck. Her early movie roles were pretty terrible, to be honest. She had to stand there and smile at cowboys. She'd scream when they told her to scream. She'd act all sweet and helpless. That's just what the studios wanted back then. They didn't care if she could actually act. They just wanted pretty girls to look pretty. But then on September 19th, 1927, everything changed in the worst possible way. Jane was 18 years old, out on a date with a 16-year-old boy named Harry Cooper. They were driving along Santa Monica Boulevard when his car smashed into another car. Jane flew through the windshield. A huge piece of glass sliced her face open, cutting from the bridge of her nose across her left cheek all the way down to below her eyebrow. She needed 14 stitches, and they didn't even give her anything for the pain. They taped her eyes shut for hours, and she couldn't get out of bed for 10 days. Her mom sued the boy for $35,000, saying that Jane couldn't work anymore because of the injury. They settled for $3,000, but the scar stayed. Makeup could cover it up a little bit, but you could still see it if you looked. So Jane started learning tricks. She learned where to stand so the light would hide the scar. She learned which angles made her look better. She learned how to turn her head just right. It made her smarter about acting, but it also made her insecure. She never stopped worrying about that scar. Between 1927 and 1929, she made about 15 short comedy films. They called them bathing beauty films, which basically meant girls in swimsuits getting wet and muddy and having pies thrown in their faces. It sounds humiliating, right? And it was. Here she was, still recovering from getting her face cut open, and the director called her Carole of the Curves to get people to look at her body instead of her scar. Most of the women in these films didn't even get their names in the credits. They didn't get paid much either.
But Hollywood still didn't see her that way. Critics called her pretty but empty. She kept getting cast as the dumb blonde over and over again. It didn't matter how charming she was or how hard she tried. The studio bosses just wanted pretty girls who looked good on camera. They didn't care about talent. Even when she showed some real skill in a film called Marriage in Transit in 1925, she still got stuck with the same shallow roles. It was like being on a factory line. She had to keep fighting just to be noticed as something more than a face. By 1928, things started getting a little better. She was getting cast in better movies, and in 1929, she made her first talking picture called High Voltage. That was huge because movies were just starting to have sound. Before that, they were all silent. So being in a talking picture meant you were part of the future, and people were finally starting to notice her. Film magazines said she was showing real range. She was getting better reviews. But it was still so hard. She had to balance making big feature films with doing those silly comedy shorts. She was exhausted. And her father wasn't sending as much money anymore, so the pressure to succeed kept getting heavier and heavier. Then on June 26, 1931, she married William Powell. She was 22, he was 38. She said she tried to be the best wife anyone could ask for, but the marriage only lasted a little over 2 years. They were just too different. He was calm, serious, and sophisticated. She was wild, loud, and loved to curse. She admitted later that it wasn't their careers that ended the marriage. They just weren't right for each other. In August 1933, she filed for divorce. The good news is they stayed friends. They even acted together later in a movie called My Man Godfrey. But the headlines about the divorce hurt her reputation. Her image took a hit. That same year, Paramount forced her to make a horror movie called Supernatural. She absolutely hated it. She begged them to let her out of it. She threatened everything except actual violence to get out of that script. She hated the director so much she called him a deli clerk. And to make things even weirder, while they were filming, a massive earthquake hit Long Beach on March 10th, 1933. It shook the whole set. Everyone was terrified. They finished the retakes by March 20th, and Carole swore she would never do horror again. But the studio still didn't get it. They still didn't understand what made her special. Here's what they did understand: money. In 1930, her contract with Paramount started at $350 a week. By 1936, it had jumped to $3,500 a week. That's 10 times more in just 6 years. Her first talking picture was called Safety in Numbers, and critics called her an amazing comedian. But she still worried about her scar all the time. She never stopped thinking about angles and lighting and where to stand. In 1931, she made a movie called It Pays to Advertise, and this was where she really started finding her voice. Fast talking, sharp jokes, quick wit. The movie magazine Photoplay said it had plenty of speed and lots of laughs. Between late 1930 and mid-1931, she finished 5 whole movies. That's almost factory speed. Her name was rising and fast. But Carole Lombard didn't just ease into being a star. She crashed into it with humor, toughness, and heartbreak that Hollywood couldn't quite figure out. In February 1934, she danced across the screen in a movie called Bolero with George Raft. The dancing was sensual and bold. It cost Paramount about $500,000 to make, but it made way more than that. There was even a famous fan dance that pushed the boundaries of what was allowed on screen. Here's the crazy part. Carole had turned down the lead role in It Happened One Night to make Bolero instead. That decision cost her an Oscar, but it gave her something just as valuable. It showed everyone she wasn't just a comedian. She could be dangerous and beautiful and complicated. People noticed. Paramount noticed too. They put her with George Raft again the next year in a movie called Rumba, but it didn't work as well the second time. Everything changed a few months later when a director named Howard Hawks saw her at a party. She was drunk and loud and completely herself, not putting on any act. Hawks thought she was perfect for his new movie called 20th Century. He cast her opposite an actor named John Barrymore. But when they started filming, Carole got nervous. She tried too hard to be good. She was stiff. So Hawks did something sneaky. He lied to her. He told her that Barrymore had called her a terrible actress behind her back. Carole didn't hesitate. She said she'd kick him where it hurts. Hawks told her to go do it. She stormed onto set, confronted Barrymore, who had absolutely no idea what she was talking about, and something just clicked inside her. Her real personality poured into the role. Critics said it was like watching a completely different woman. Suddenly, she wasn't just in movies, she was a star. Then on June 2nd, 1934, everything stopped. Her boyfriend, a singer named Russ Columbo, died in one of the strangest accidents Hollywood had ever seen. He was visiting a friend named Lansing Brown who was playing around with an old gun. A match got stuck in the firing mechanism, the gun went off, bounced a bullet off a table, and hit Columbo in the head. He was only 26 years old. Carole was supposed to have dinner with him that night. Instead, she stood next to Bing Crosby at the funeral. She told reporters they had been engaged. She never spoke about him in depth ever again. Some people say the grief never really left her. Maybe it didn't. In November 1935, she found her rhythm again in a movie called Hands Across the Table. She played a manicurist who wants to marry a rich man but ends up falling for Fred MacMurray's broke character. The chemistry between them was so incredible that they made 3 more movies together. Audiences couldn't get enough, neither could Paramount. Her salary kept climbing. That same year, she starred in My Man Godfrey, playing a character named Irene Bullock opposite her real-life ex-husband, William Powell. He had actually demanded that she be cast in the role, but he never told the studio why. They filmed from April 15th to May 27th, 1936. She made $45,000. Powell made $87,500. The movie.
That same year, she and Clark Gable bought a 20-acre ranch for $50,000. The house was over 7,000 square feet, with fruit groves, stables, and even a pigsty. They lived like farmers, not movie stars. Carole only made 1 color film in her entire career. It was called Nothing's Sacred, and it came out on November 25th, 1937. It was only 77 minutes long, but she loved it. In the movie, she faked having a deadly disease and fooled the media. The satire fit her personality perfectly. Earlier that year, she made Swing High, Swing Low with Fred MacMurray again. They played performers whose love gets tested by fame and alcohol. It showed that Carole could do more than just comedy. She could do drama, too. The film got great reviews and gave her more room to grow as an actress. But in 1938, she stumbled. She made a movie with Warner Brothers called Fools for Scandal, and it was terrible. Audiences hated it, critics destroyed it, even Carole admitted it was bad.
She said the only nice thing anyone told her about that movie was how good she looked in it. Then in 1939, she picked herself back up with a movie called In Name Only, with Cary Grant. She played a widow in love with a married man. She made $150,000 for it. The film did okay, and critics saw a different side of her. She was deeper, more serious. That same year, she ran off and married Clark Gable. They had first worked together way back in 1932 on a movie called No Man of Her Own, but nothing happened between them then. She later said he gave her nothing during that film. But everything changed at a fancy ball in January 1936. She was 27, he was 34. She showed up with another actor, and Clark came alone. They danced, they flirted, they laughed. He invited her to his hotel room. She shot back, "Who do you think you are, Clark Gable?" From that night forward, they were never apart for more than 6 days straight. They got married in Kingman, Arizona on March 29, 1939. On March 29, 1939, Clark Gable and Carole Lombard drove 400 miles out to Kingman, Arizona, and got married without telling anyone. It was just a quiet ceremony in a dusty little town that their publicist had recommended. Carole wore a gray flannel suit with a polka-dotted shirt and cried through the whole ceremony. Clark nervously handed over the wedding ring before the minister even asked for it. Then they drove back in the middle of the night, getting home at 3 in the morning. Just a few hours later, they were standing on their front lawn smiling for reporters. They moved into that 20-acre ranch Carole had bought from a director named Raoul Walsh. The house had 9 bedrooms. Carole redecorated it in a rustic American style, but her bathroom was covered in white marble with mirrors everywhere and crystal lights. They called each other Ma and Pa. They didn't throw wild Hollywood parties or chase attention. They raised chickens, planted citrus trees, and had quiet dinners with close friends. Carole turned that place into a real home, even while the outside world kept trying to pull them back toward all the Hollywood drama. The drama came fast. In 1940, Clark was forced to make a movie he didn't want to do called Strange Cargo with an actress named Joan Crawford. Joan had been declared a box office poison by theater owners, meaning people didn't want to see her movies anymore, and she was fighting to save her career. She insisted that Clark be her co-star, even though he had zero interest. They'd had a brief thing years before, but now he was married and completely devoted to Carole. That just made Joan more bitter. She would whisper things to him between takes, things that made him storm off the set while she laughed. The tension was awful. Clark hated the script, didn't want to be there, and couldn't hide how frustrated he was. Joan later said she never thought Clark would make a good husband, especially not to a woman with her own fame. But then Carole came along, and all of Joan's chances disappeared. Carole wanted children desperately. Right after their wedding in 1939, she started trying to get pregnant every single month. Then on August 5th, she was rushed to the hospital. Publicly, they said it was appendicitis. But the truth was she had suffered a miscarriage after going horseback riding. A doctor performed surgery on her. By November, people started whispering about adoption. The couple pushed back, saying they wanted their own child, a Gable baby. In 1940, Carole only made 2 movies because she was hoping to get pregnant. Every new rumor forced her to defend herself in interviews. When it became too much, she threw herself into the ranch, filling it with horses, chickens, cats, and dogs. Each pet gave her comfort. Each failed pregnancy left her quieter. In December 1940, after almost 2 years of trying and failing to have a baby, Clark and Carole traveled all the way across the country to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. She had surgery with one of the top gynecologists in the country. On January 1st, Clark also had painful jaw surgery. While they were there, they met the governor, visited the Naval Academy, and signed a cast for an 11-year-old girl. Before leaving, they sent 68 pounds of chocolate to the Children's Hospital. But the rumors didn't stop. By the summer of 1941, people still thought Carole was pregnant. She wasn't, and she was exhausted from saying so. Then the war came. After Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Carole pushed Clark to join the Hollywood Victory Committee, which was helping with the war effort. When he didn't feel up to the public role, she stepped in. She volunteered to go on a war bond tour in his place and headed to Indianapolis in January 1942. On January 15th, she raised over $2 million in a single day. That was 4 times her goal. She sang the Star-Spangled Banner in front of 12,000 people, signed autographs for hours, and smiled through complete exhaustion. When someone asked where Clark was, she just said, "At home, one of us has to work." But Carole didn't want to stay away from Clark any longer. She was desperate to get back home to him. Her mother, Elizabeth, and their friend Otto Winkler begged her to take the train back instead of flying. They were both scared of flying. Elizabeth believed in numerology, and she pointed out something creepy. They were flying on TWA Flight 3 in a DC-3 airplane as a party of 3 people, and Carole was 33 years old. The number 3 was everywhere. But Carole didn't care about superstitions. She flipped a coin against Otto to settle the argument about whether to fly or take the train. He lost. That means they would fly. At 4:06 in the afternoon, the plane landed in Albuquerque, New Mexico. 15 U.S. Air Force pilots showed up with orders to board the plane, and they started bumping civilian passengers off to make room. Many passengers gave up their seats without a fight, including a famous violinist. But Carole refused. She reminded the airline staff that she had just raised $2 million for the war effort, and she said there was no way she was giving up her spot. The airline gave in and let her stay on the plane. Here's where it gets important. Her luggage was heavy. The military gear that got loaded on added even more weight. Because of all that extra weight, the fuel tanks couldn't be completely filled, which meant the plane would need to make an extra stop to refuel. After refueling in Las Vegas, TWA Flight 3 took off at 7:07 in the evening on January 16, 1942.
The skies were clear that night, but because of the war, blackout rules had shut down most of the navigation beacons that pilots used to stay on course. Only one beacon, called the Arden Beacon, remained lit. The pilot, Captain Wayne Williams, veered slightly off course, about 7 miles to the right of where he should have been. He flew through restricted airspace. Just 13 minutes after takeoff, at 7:20 in the evening, the plane slammed into Potosi Mountain at an elevation of 7,770 feet. It was only 80 feet from the very top of the mountain. All 22 people on board died instantly. Searchers couldn't reach the crash site until 9 o'clock the next morning. The snow, the cliffs, the wreckage, it was brutal. Carole's body was found burned and without a head. She was identified by a tiny wisp of unburned blonde hair and one diamond earring that Clark had given her. Her wedding ring was never found. Clark offered $10,000 to anyone who could find it. People kept searching for years. Some still search today. As soon as Clark heard the news, he flew to Las Vegas with MGM studio staff. He didn't speak during the entire flight. Everyone could see he already knew she was gone. At the base of the mountain, he begged to join the rescue team. They said no. But later, when no one was looking, he tried climbing the mountain himself to reach her. He slipped on the ice and had to be led back down, out of breath and completely broken. When one of the rescue workers came back from the crash site, he handed Clark a single charred ruby. It was all that was left of the diamond earring set. Clark put it on a chain and wore it around his neck until the day he died. The funeral was held on January 21, 1942, at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, exactly as Carole had written in her will back in August 1939. Only 46 guests were allowed to attend. William Powell came with his wife. Spencer Tracy was there. President Roosevelt sent a telegram calling her a star the nation would never forget. He later awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She was the first woman to die in the line of duty during the war. Clark collapsed. He stopped eating. He drank constantly. He lost 20 pounds. He watched her old movies late into the night using the projector she had given him for Christmas. He wore a locket with her hair and the ruby inside it. When MGM tried to stop him from joining the Army, he forced his way in anyway. He told friends he didn't care if he lived or died. From May to September 1943, he flew 5 combat missions over Europe. On August 12th, a German shell tore through his bomber and clipped the heel of his boot before exiting near his head. It didn't explode. He barely survived. 2 years to the day after her war bond tour, a ship called the SS Carole Lombard was launched, with Clark standing there in his uniform. That ship went on to rescue hundreds of people in the Pacific.
Her last movie, To Be or Not to Be, came out 2 months after her death. It was a comedy about Nazis, and people weren't sure anyone would laugh. But they did. The film was so good, it was preserved in the National Film Registry in 1996. In 1999, the American Film Institute ranked Carole Lombard as the 23rd greatest female screen legend of all time. When Clark Gable died on November 16, 1960, at age 59, his fifth wife had him buried right beside Carole in the crypt he had bought for her 18 years earlier. He had actually bought 3 crypts, one for Carole, one for her mother Elizabeth, and one for himself. He had never stopped loving her. Even after marrying again, even after years and years passed, he still wore that same locket with her hair and ruby inside it. When someone asked him about Carole in 1957, he said he didn't avoid talking about her because it made him sad. He just didn't want her memory to be kicked around. He said he had great respect for the place she had in his life. He kept her close to his heart every single day, and when he died, he made sure she would be the last person he ever rested beside because she had been the only one who truly mattered. So, what really happened that night on Potosi Mountain? The pilot went off course, the navigation beacons were turned off because of the war, the plane was too heavy because of military passengers and gear, the fuel tanks couldn't be filled all the way, Carole had refused to give up her seat, and her mother's numerology warning about all those 3s turned out to be right in the most tragic way possible. It was a perfect storm of bad decisions, bad luck, and wartime restrictions. A crash that never should have happened. A star gone too soon at just 33 years old. But Carole Lombard's legacy didn't die on that mountain. She changed Hollywood. She proved that women could be funny and smart and tough and vulnerable all at the same time. She fought against being typecast. She demanded equal pay. She gave everything to her country when it needed her most. And she loved with her whole heart, even when it hurt. If this story moved you, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who loves old Hollywood stories or who needs to hear about an incredible woman who refused to be anything less than herself. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep bringing you stories like this. Stories about real people who changed the world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.